Tiger Woods can have a coach, I can have a coach. You want to go far in life, you got to pull a team together. You have to negotiate collaboration. The real application of empathy, while it does a lot for the person you're applying it to, it does a lot for you too.
And I realize that negotiation is key to everything. Is that a fair, would you say that revelation makes sense?
Yeah, and it's interesting that I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs don't really see themselves as negotiating that much, because most people just think you're in a negotiation when you talk about price,
Yeah.
when money's at stake. And then also, not everybody wants to go back and forth over money, which is really limited thinking. But anytime the words "I want" or "I need" are coming out of your mouth, you're in a negotiation.
I love that. Yeah, whether it's business or personal. I mean, and you're in relationships in your personal life. There's always a negotiation. So I definitely want to share with my audience all of the tools that you are so elegant in disclosing that are going to help people win any exchange in life. But before we get to that, your background is just so interesting. You're a former FBI hostage negotiator.
Yeah.
Tell me about
Yeah.
that, man. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was far more satisfying than I ever expected it to be. I mean, I was originally in SWAT. I was on the FBI SWAT team in Pittsburgh, and then tried out for the Bureau's version of the Navy SEALs, the hostage rescue team. A lot of those guys are former SEALs and Delta guys, and re-injured my knee, but like crisis response, because I like people when you have to make a decision. I think deferring decisions is the great bane of mankind's existence. I mean, Kennedy had a quote which I'm sure I'll butcher, but the long range costs of comfortable inaction always exceed of mistaken action now.
Wow.
And that's not exactly the way he said it, but that's what he was driving at. Inaction is the real killer. So I re-injured my knee excuse me, and decided that because I had reconstructive surgery again, and how many times can they do that? We had hostage negotiators. I figured, how hard can that be? I could talk to terrorists. I mean, I literally said to myself, I could talk to terrorists. And so it's not what you do most of the time. It ultimately ended up being a lot of what I did when I was working kidnappings all over the world. But yeah, it was pretty cool. And it's, if you're on SWAT, you sit around while the negotiators do their thing and talk the guy out. So you don't really get to do your SWAT thing that much. But when you're a negotiator, you talk people out, and it's very satisfying. It's kind of cool.
You said something very interesting just off the bat, that making decisions is so
Yeah.
important. How can we be more decisive? Because this is something that I didn't even know that we were going to go this way for this conversation, but I struggle with being decisive sometimes. I get analysis paralysis.
Right.
And in my relationships, like past intimate relationships, I'm just not decisive. I never make the decision to like take the trip because I'm pretty comfortable where I am, and that always has led in the past to conflict with me, even when it comes to picking a restaurant and being decisive. Any tips for that?
Yeah. Well, vision drives decision.
Hmm.
So when you're being indecisive, whether you're conscious of it or not, you're afraid of a negative outcome. You're envisioning a negative outcome. It's and that our natural default mode is to do that. So a little bit of it is changing the theater in your mind,
Hmm.
or thinking about how much you're going to lose by inaction. Dan Sullivan runs an outfit called Strategic Coach, and both my son Brandon and I are in Strategic Coach. And it's a great thing for entrepreneurs, because everybody needs coaching. Heck, Tiger Woods has a coach. If Tiger Woods can have a coach, I can have a coach. And all the top executives I know, whether they be corporate executives or entrepreneurial executives, the frequency of coaches among top players is really, really high. So anyway, a lot of us entrepreneurs go to Sullivan, top tier people, and he has something called the gap in the gain. and you're either in gap thinking or you're in gain thinking.
Hmm.
And so, we had an employee in my company that I was a couple of years ago that we had to let go, and we were very frustrated with his lack of output. But what we assigned him to, we quadrupled that business that year. And I kept getting frustrated by how we weren't getting where we wanted to go, which is gap thinking. And sometimes I forgot the fact that we quadrupled what we wanted. So this whole gap gain thinking, and your default mode is to be in the gap. What did I lose? What could I lose? What am I missing out on? That's our natural default wiring. So what do you do about it? You just address that it's there, and then take whatever small steps you need to overcome of it. Some of it is gratitude exercises, great mental health stuff, keeps you in the game. Some of it is, look, if you're in the US, and this is going to sound condescending, but if you're in the US, you're ahead of 95% of the planet. There are people who literally have to worry about whether or not they're going to make it to the sunrise because they live in a dangerous place. We live in a blessed place. If you're in the US, you're playing with house money. So go for it. The universe, the powers that be, we're not here on the planet to be fearful. Go for it.
There's this great line from one of my absolute favorite movies of all time, Mr. Nobody. As long as you don't choose, everything remains possible. And that to me has been a plague because I identify with that. I like to keep my
Wow.
options open, but
Wow,
sometimes
interesting.
it's been to the detriment of, you know, uh, business decisions that need to be made, difficult decisions in your personal life. Um, so
Wow,
yeah,
that's really interesting. And you can get something like that in your head, you know, uh, just two lines. And if it rattles around in your head, it'll hold you back. That's really interesting.
yeah, but I think that being more decisive is definitely an important, and also when you're stepping into your sort of your masculine energy in a relationship, especially there's all these memes on social media about how just counting the relationships that have ended because two people couldn't decide what to have for dinner.
Yeah, it's horrible, right? It's horrifying, and that's the truth. So yeah, step into it. I mean, a shot on goal is always a good shot. And I don't know if Wayne Gretzky said that. I attribute it to him all the time, but man, I like taking those shots and finding out.
So, what are some areas in life where negotiation comes into play? Because this is your expertise. You're brilliant. You're so articulate, and you've got so much insight to offer. So, you mentioned negotiation. Often people are talking about like money, and when my head goes to like buying a car, for example.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
but there are just so many examples of where negotiation plays an important role in getting what we want. Can you just sort of like explain that to our audience so that we really get the picture of why the tools that you have to offer are so valuable for everybody?
Yeah, well, it's in anytime you want something, and it's about great collaboration. You want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go as a team. You want to go far in life, you got to pull a team together. You have to
Mm,
negotiate collaboration with each other. You got to negotiate collaboration in all your relationships. Your goal should be long-term relationships, which makes negotiation an acceptable strategy in all relationships.
mm,
You're not trying to hurt somebody. You're trying to have a great long-term relationship. So, and practice on the little stuff. Like you walk into a restaurant, you want a good seat. You're entitled to a good seat in a restaurant. If they walk you past the table because it's your first time in a restaurant that you want to sit at, and they're walking you to the back of the room, um, but negotiate to not be a jerk, because the people that sit you down, let's say you get that table, you don't want it to be a half an hour before the waiter shows up. you know,
right.
you, you don't want them putting your food at the back. So, how do you do that? Empathy is recognizing how the other side sees things,
Hmm.
and then coming right out and say it. Like if I want a better table in a restaurant, when I ask for it, what's that person going to think? they're immediately going to think, look, look at this self-entitled person. He probably don't even tip well. This guy hasn't even sat down. He's already asking for stuff.
Hmm.
And so what am I going to say to get that better table? I'm going to look at him and say, listen, I'm getting ready to ask you something that's going to make you seem like I'm entitled to something I don't deserve. And because that's what they're going to think. So I'm anticipating it. And they get this look on their face and I'm like, what? And I go like, I want to sit at that table over there. And they're like,
Hmm.
oh, of course, of course. And they walk me right over. And then they're happy to deal with me. That was a negotiation. No money involved. But I want people to be happy to deal with me, to want to continue to deal with me, because there's no such thing as a one-off. Even if you think it's the car thing, which is what you asked about. Everybody wants to know how to get a better price on a car, as if every negotiation was a car negotiation, which is a one-off. How do I really kick the salesman's ass and get a great price on a car, or the cabinets, or something like that? Well, look, if you got a great price on a car, you're going to want to come back. They're going to service the car. You're coming back to everybody. So look at all negotiations as yes, you want more, and no, you do not want the person feeling bad about having given it to you, because you're going to want more tomorrow too. So I'm always looking for those opportunities, and they're everywhere. They're in Starbucks. They're everywhere.
In the example that you gave with the waiter, it sounded like what you were doing, just to deconstruct that a little bit, you were disarming the
Yeah.
host,
Yes.
to use
Yes.
a combat term.
Yeah. No, that's a great analogy, and one of our strategies. When you learn the Black Swan method, we have something called the accusations audit. Now, there was a time when we actually referred to that as disarming empathy. We
Hmm.
use that exact word because we don't want to be combative. So, how do we disarm them? Some people refer to it as self deprecating humor, another version of that. And that's actually the emotional intelligence behind self deprecating humor is really high, because then what you're doing is you're disarming, you're using empathy, and you're doing it in a playful manner, and that's a great combination of stuff, so it is very disarming.
To talk to me about empathy. So it's really interesting that when you're trying to negotiate with somebody, we tend to think of it as this combative interaction, right? But actually,
Right.
you're saying, no, 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 we got to be friends,
Yeah, or friendly.
friendly.
There's a couple fine distinctions. Being friends, being friendly, being liked, being likable. Draw some real fine lines there. You got no control whether or not somebody likes you. You have complete control whether or not you're likable.
Mm.
Stuart Diamond, brilliant negotiation professor out of Wharton, wrote a book, negotiation, called Getting More. And Stuart's a sharp dude. I've never met him in person. I've been impressed by his material, his thought patterns. My son Brandon is a very big Stuart Diamond fan. But I did hear him speak one time, and this is the source of my data. I heard Stuart Diamond say you're 6 times more likely to make a deal with somebody you like.
Hmm.
Being likable increases your deal velocity. Being likable in a playful way, there's other data out there that indicates you're 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind. Now you start to see how these things begin to link together to give you negotiation power, to give you the ability to make a better deal and have the other side want to deal with you again. So you start rolling these things together and you increase your deal velocity. Then you add in a couple of other characteristics and you make better deals and you make more deals is what you're after. And I went off on like 3 or 4 tangents there. I apologize.
No, but I definitely like it makes complete sense. My brothers, again, going back to them, they work in the corporate world, so I get to hear all these anecdotes that I've never personally experienced. But one of them is a manager actually, and he says that when he's looking to hire somebody, the sad reality is you're more inclined to want to hire somebody that you just want to hang out with and spend time with because you're going
Yes.
to be spending a lot of time with that person.
Yeah. 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 That's a great point. That's the reality of human interaction. So yeah, that's a great observation. Be likable. But don't allow yourself to being taken hostage by needing to be liked. I think
Hmm.
that was one of the distinctions that I was trying to make as I was rambling. But if you need to be liked and you get a cutthroat on the other side, then all they got to do is, they're going to take you hostage by your need to be liked. And I can separate those two things. I can be very likable, I can smile, and I can say I'm sorry, we can't make the deal. I like you personally, but the deal's just not going to work.
Hmm. What are some other characteristics that make a good negotiator? You've talked about likability, empathy, smiling. Good example of nonverbal communication.
Yeah, and you know what? And let's get back to this empathy thing for a second too,
Hmm.
because I want to clear some of this up. In today's vernacular, in today's conversation, empathy is agreement, empathy is compassion, empathy is sympathy. Empathy is something, I empathize with you, which almost means like I'm on your side. That is not empathy. Not empathy, not empathy. Empathy is being able to see it from the other side's perspective and then being able to articulate their perspective, which means, a Palestinian should be able to use empathy with an Israeli. I had to be trained to use empathy with a terrorist, with somebody from Al Qaeda.
Hmm.
And then it becomes extremely powerful. But we don't see it around us at all. Excuse me. You mentioned Clubhouse before. I and Nicole Benham. I'm on do Clubhouse stuff with her a lot, and her room, the Beyond room, which is great interviews.
I love her. Shout out to Nicole Benham. She's a Clubhouse superstar
Yeah, she really is.
and a good friend.
Yeah. Yep. Very good friend. So we're doing I think I was doing it with her one night where we're doing a thing with let's it's when Israel is spanking Hamas for good reason. Um, and everybody was up in arms over it. And so we said, okay, let's get people to support the Palestinians up. Let's get people to support Israel up. Let's have a dialogue. And the only rule of was to say, before I disagree with you, here's what I believe your perspective is. Now, you could argue all you want, but all you got to do is articulate their perspective before you tell them why it's wrong or before you disagree. Before I disagree, here's what I think your perspective is. And almost no one could execute that.
Hmm.
People only wanted to be argumentative. Now, the interesting thing about that also is, too, nobody got mad. That was probably the only hosted discussion on the topic on Clubhouse that didn't degenerate into screaming matches, name calling. What's the point? Even the people that were completely pro Palestinian, who wanted to do nothing but attack the people that were pro Israel, the mere act of trying to articulate the other side's perspective calmed them down.
Hmm.
They didn't leave the discussion feeling poisoned by the dialogue. And that's what these arguments do to you, which is what puts you in a downward spiral. Because this anger and self righteousness that tends to go with it really is a toxin that erodes who you are as a human being. So, empathy, the real application of empathy, while it does a lot for the person you're applying it to, it does a lot for you too. It actually saves your soul and your spirit from the toxins that anger put in you. And I think it's really important to make that point, that really understanding the other side is medicinal for you.
Crucially important. And I mean, whether applied to geopolitical conflict or your relationship with your significant other,
Yeah.
being able to understand their side. And you also said repeating it. So is repeating their side, would you say that that's one of the sort of primary tools of empathy to show that you're getting the other side's perspective?
Yeah, it's a great start. I mean, we in the Black Swan method, we get 9 skills, and basically one of them is paraphrasing.
Hmm.
There's a couple different ways to repeat back to somebody. You can pick a couple of words, word for word, 1 to 3 ish words, which we refer to as a mirror, or you can repeat it back in your own words, which is paraphrasing. But it's really helpful for both sides to do that. And sometimes when you're struggling to figure out where somebody's coming from, just the mere act of repeating what they've said out loud kicks your own mental circuits into gear and generates in-depth understanding for both of you. So just repeating it is a great thing to do. It's a great skill.
Are there any tips? Because I feel like sometimes that might, if done the wrong way, can come off as sounding patronizing.
Great question. And what causes you to sound patronizing is tone of voice.
Hmm.
I mean, one of the secret hidden skills that's out in the open is the magic of tone of voice. And yeah, we like to say in the Black Swan Group, your inner voice betrays your outer voice. So if you're trying to paraphrase with them and you think that they're stupid, your inner voice is you're an idiot, and that's going to come out in your tone of voice. Or if you are genuinely curious, genuine curiosity is one of the great hacks. If you're genuinely curious, that's going to come out in your voice, and the other side is going to respond to the fact that you're actually curious and you're not accusatory. So, tone of voice is the distinction, and so many people overlook it because it's so simple, but it's absolute magic.
You have the tone of your voice is very soothing. It's very, if I were negotiating anything with you, I would feel like just very calm. Like I would be just disarmed by your voice quality alone. Because I feel like when people enter these sorts of relationships, there's like a tendency to jump to fight or flight. But the tone of your
Yes.
voice is very, yeah, it puts me right into that sort of like, it's very calming.
Yeah, which then the next step from that is collaboration.
Hmm.
You're not going to feel attacked. If you don't have to worry about me attacking you, you're going to be much more open to collaborating with me. So we can take negotiation from a zero sum game to a positive sum game. And that's where the real magic is.
Yeah. I've heard you say in previous interviews that asking the question why is something that doesn't always have the intended effect.
Right.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like every human being on the planet, we've got it beat into us from about age 2 on that if somebody's asking us why, we did something wrong. When
Hmm.
you're a little kid and you make a mistake, whatever your ethnicity, whatever your culture, little kids around the world break stuff or do stuff because they don't know any better. And the nearest adult, whether you're Palestinian or Israeli, the nearest adult is going to point at you and say, "Why did you do that?" And so we get it beat into our head over and over when somebody says why, that we're being accused of doing something wrong. Now, a lot of times, and there's a lot of business advice, which is find out their why.
Hmm.
The philosophy, the strategy behind that is sound. Which is find out what motivates them on a deeper level. What's their why? But the problem is, if you ask them why, they're going to be like, "Oh, why? I must." You think that me wanting that is wrong, and just the word triggers a conditioned response, a battered response. We're battered by why. So just getting a lot of people that I know, they just ask what instead of why. Said, why do you do that? To say, what makes you want that?
Hmm.
Complete change in the way that lands, and you're getting at the same information. So why is one of those terms that words that's problematic depending upon which side of it you're on.
It makes people really defensive.
Absolutely, every time, unavoidable.
Wow. When is negotiating different when two people have sort of an aligned, a shared outcome that they desire? Like, for example, two people who are married, there's a conflict. They want to stay married. They don't want to end the relationship. They want to get along. But what about when two people have completely differing visions of their ideal outcome?
Yeah, and the interesting word there is vision, because vision drives decision, and a lot of people will have different visions and want it differently. The hard thing about that is, no matter how smart you are, it's impossible to know what the best outcome is. I mean, I could explain it on an intellectual level. It's an asymmetric world. Which means everybody has imperfect information, which means there's stuff you don't know.
Hmm.
And you're always holding stuff back. Nobody. We've trained thousands of people, and when you're in Black Swan training, we'll say, how many negotiations were you in where you weren't holding information back, that you didn't have hidden information? And people thinking, you're like, yeah, I'm always holding something back. Of course, they have hidden information. So if you do, so do they. And you don't, if it's hidden, you don't know what it is, which means you can't possibly know what the best outcome is, which means you're going to have a different vision because you've got imperfect information.
Hmm.
Now, the really hard thing to wrap your mind around is to add another layer of complexity onto that. Is like, what happens when the hidden information overlaps? Nobody has any idea what kind of cool stuff is in there. That's where we talk about black swans, the things that change everything, the nuggets that change everything. So most of the time, to get back to your original question, the people are going to have differing visions. You need to be a little Zen like, a little Tai Chi like, a little a little Buddhist in that letting go and go into it, being willing to discover what's going on. Now that's easy to say and it's hard to do because we're wired to have a goal. And
Hmm.
to let go of that goal is really unsettling. But that's where the magic is. You got to let your own vision go.
Yeah. You've also, I've heard, offer another tactic. Uh, say something wrong because the
Oh
other
yeah.
side. Tell me
Yeah.
about that. That's another counterintuitive. I never would have thought that would
That's
be
a
a
sneaky move.
and
Yeah.
yeah, but it's sneaky, but it works. Tell my audience about this trick.
Yeah, well, we'll refer to it as a mislabel. A label is a verbal observation, but what it is oftentimes is inviting correction, saying something intentionally wrong. It seems like that this deal just isn't going to work for you at all. Well, yeah, it's going to work for me if I get this. Boom, you just gave up some great information. People love to correct. Now,
Hmm.
people hate to be corrected because when you get corrected, you're embarrassed unless you're smart enough to do it on purpose. You get accidentally corrected, you get embarrassed, and people see that humiliation. They feel humiliation. People would literally rather die than be embarrassed, than be humiliated. Like if you ask somebody, you want to stand up in the town square while all thousands of people laugh at you and ridicule you, which would you rather have, ridicule, or can we just cut your head off and kill you right now? Most people go like, kill me now. Like that's how bad embarrassment is. Yeah, I die of embarrassment. That's where that phrase comes from.
Hmm.
But that's your perspective on it. The other side, what you felt embarrassed by was a correction. Correction is a helping thing. Like when people correct you, two things happen. On some level, they absolutely believe they're helping you, which is taking them from adversary to collaborator.
Hmm.
When somebody corrects you, they've just stepped to your side of the table. Now they feel in a superior position, but they've gone from com- combative enemy, adversary, to collaborator. You just gained. Now, the other cool thing about the fact that you just force them to come to your side of the table, they don't even know it, is people are ridiculously honest when they correct. You'll trigger some quick information and they will blurt out stuff that they should not tell you. There's a real estate deal student in a class we were teaching at Georgetown accidentally said something wrong about this commercial building that was available and assumed that the other side didn't know what they were doing. They said, sounds like you guys just don't believe in the market fundamentals. And they said, no, 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 the owner's underwater on other buildings.
Hmm.
And like, what? Like there's no way that the real estate agent should ever have told the buyer that the seller had other commercial properties they were underwater on. That was like closely held. I mean, you're never gonna. That's kind of
No,
weakness you're never gonna give up.
because that gives the
But
buyers like complete leverage over the
yeah,
seller. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then, but it was a correcting move,
Hmm.
and so the agent got to feel good correcting. And so it's like this. If you can wrap your mind around being corrected, you get stuff out of people that they will not tell anybody else.
So an intentional erroneous statement to get the other party to correct you um, can be a very useful tool to turn that person into a collaborator.
It turns them into collaborator. It gets you proprietary information faster.
Wow.
And then the kicker of all of it is, there's a phrase, people don't remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel.
Mm.
Well, since they felt great when they corrected you, correcting is satisfying, then it's also great for continued collaboration. They're never going to regret telling you something they shouldn't have told you. They're going to remember how they felt when they said it. That's the memory that they will retain. So it doesn't hurt your relationships. It increases them.
I love that. So useful. Um, when it comes to, I mean, the title of your book, Never Split the Difference. When it comes to like number based negotiations, something that I've always heard, you don't want to be the first, you don't want to offer the first number.
Right.
Something to that effect.
Right.
Um, why is that? And are there any other sort of really simple tricks that you could offer us for people that are, in sort of financial number based negotiations?
Yeah, and that's one of the things in negotiation. It's a great debate, whether or not you throw a number first, because
Hmm.
there are a lot of people out there that want to throw a high anchor first, and they have their reasons for that. But what they ignore is, naming high anchoring makes deals go away. The the vast majority, which means not all, but the vast majority of the people that are really good negotiation practitioners, they want you going first because they look at that as information,
Hmm.
and they love information. They also know that if they go first and they go too high and they drive you away from the table, then they lost a deal that they should have made. And I heard a businessman once say, I never lost money on a deal I didn't make. Yes, you did, because you wasted time, and you should have made money. And your real currency is time. You use money to buy you time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the currency. So yeah, driving deals away from the table is a bad idea. You don't make it costs you money. So that's why you don't want to name a number first. Also, you may come in low. That's why you don't want to name a number first. So what do you do instead? Yeah, this side's got a number. You coax it out of them. Something as simple as, sounds like you got a price in mind, increases the chances that they'll throw a number. Does that work every time? No, it just works more often than say, what's your price? Like, what's your budget is the most horrible way to ask the other side the number, because everybody's been conditioned to not respond to that.
Oh, that's what I do. So what's the better alternative?
Sounds like you got a price in mind.
Sounds like you got a price in mind.
Or sounds like, and there's other versions of that. Sounds like you got a range in mind.
Mm.
You want to be gentle about it. Your tone of voice, you want to be curious. Sounds like you got a price in mind. That makes you feel like I'm leading you into something. But if I were to say, sounds like you got a price in mind, that feels curious. It feels you feel safer in responding to that. Now, the great negotiators also are probably going to give you your price, because they know that once you get your price, you're going to be ridiculously flexible on terms. And that's where the real money is.
Mm.
So if you negotiate with a Black Swan Group and you got a price, we're going to give you your price. We're not going to hammer you on the price. We want you to be happy with the deal. Your principal happiness is going to come from price. Everybody's wrapped up in price. But then we're going to start talking about terms, and we're going to figure out how we're going to tweak this deal to make it better for us and for you. But we know the real negotiation comes when you get into the terms, and I don't want you getting bent out of shape over feeling you got exploited over price.
I love that. Yeah, that whole thing about, asking your budget. For now on, it's all about the range. Sounds like you've got like a range in mind. I really like that. It's also a lot um less, I don't know, it's a lot more friendly. It's like
Yes,
turning the other person into a collaborator. I'm starting to see the theme that you really want to make the other person, no matter who it is, feel like they're collaborating with you, as opposed to this sort of making a transaction with you.
1000%. 1000%. Every step of the way, every aspect of the design, regardless of how adversarial my counterpart is. And Jim Camp wrote a great book called Start with No back in 2002. He always talked about the person on the other side of the table as the adversary.
Hmm.
That's the way Camp was wired. Great negotiation advice, but he saw everybody as an adversary. We don't even use that term. We use counterparts. If I'm training you in a Black Swan method, I'm going to change your terminology. We're going to change your terminology from adversary to counterpart because we want you wired for collaboration because you're going to make more money as a collaborator.
I love that. I mean, money is important. It's energy. Um,
Yes.
definitely appreciate that. So, one of the core tenets: be friendly. Make the person be likable. The person doesn't have to like you, but be likable.
Yeah.
Um, striking up conversation with people. Uh, I feel like these tools could be used to make friends.
Yep.
But when it comes to
Get a girl's phone
initiating,
number.
get girls' phone numbers. Yeah,
It's a relationship that you're hoping to be long term, right? Yeah, ideally.
there you go. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, can you talk to us about striking up conversation with people? Just something super simple like that, which I think is very foundational.
Yeah.
Um, Chris Voss, how can I strike up conversation with anybody?
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna give you two phrases. Um, gather data with your eyes. Do a cold read. Gather data with your eyes. What's a cold read? You look at somebody. You take a wild guess on what's going through their mind, what kind of day they're having. That's gathering data with your eyes. You know, somebody looks stressed. Look at them. Say, tough day. Make an actual observation of how you read their mood in the moment and then throw it out there verbally. You will be probably the only person that actually looked at them that entire day
Hmm.
and saw them as a human being. That's transformative and startling in a delightful way for them.
Hmm.
Secondly, you have suddenly become different from any of the other hundreds of bozos that they've encountered that day that didn't pay attention to them all. It instantly causes you to stand out. Now, a lot of people just look at this as compliments, and it is compliments, but an observational compliment. It's an observation. Yeah, I think Bill Clinton, I think, was famous for this, and probably still is. But I remember reading about, you get a compliment from Bill Clinton in the first few moments of interacting with him, but it would be an accurate compliment. I mean, he'd notice something about you and comment on it, and he gathered data with his eyes. He made an observation. He did a cold read. He picked out something about you that he knew that you had taken the time or was a indicator of you. Now, it doesn't, and I'm sure that Clinton probably focused specifically on something you had on. But what you also have on is a look on your face. And now I can take it one step further and I can take a look at your face because the look on your face is probably a direct reflection of what's going through your mind. And so let me dial into you as a human being. So gather data with your eyes, do a cold read, and make an observation. And the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Hmm.
Again, another one of our students at Georgetown who was learning the Black Swan method, she used to do this with cab drivers all the time. She said one time, she threw enough observations because you get really good at this. It's, the TV show The Mentalist. They just gather data with their eyes and they're making observations. She said the cab driver turned around and looked at her and said, "Do you know my wife?" But every time you do this, you get better at it too. And then, I mean, people feel seen. And you're the one that saw them. And it's this great upward spiral for doing that. So do a cold read, gather data with your eyes, throw the observation out.
Any tricks on how not to appear creepy? Um, is humor an essential part of that, or because I think a lot of people put pressure on themselves. We'll use the example that you gave of introducing yourself to a girl or a guy, member of the opposite
Anybody,
sex
yeah.
or same sex,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, how do you? I think a lot of people try to be funny, come up with witty. They put a lot of pressure on themselves. Is that an important ingredient, or is it purely, about just observing and then making a simple observation to them?
That's a great question and something I left out, but is continue to observe. I mean, once you throw this observation out, you're going to get a response.
Hmm.
You get creepy if you're not paying attention to how they respond. Like if you're determined that no matter what, you're going to continue to be funny. You're not paying attention to them.
Hmm.
Let it be a dance. Let them lead, and then it will be a great collaboration. As soon as you start ignoring their response, um, now you got a problem. Now you're creepy. So continue to gather data. Like I never heard anybody describe Bill Clinton as creepy. Now that we're discussing this, I realized that had to have continued to stay dialed into the person that he was talking to and responding appropriately to how they responded. And there is story after story because, when you're president or politician, you're talking about micro interactions. You're talking to somebody, human beings, for maybe 15 seconds to 3 minutes at a time, and you were moving on. So it's not like these are long conversations. So, and I never saw him in action, but as we're talking about it now, I knew these were brief interactions. He had to continue to be gathering data with his eyes, and then responding appropriately as he moved forward.
What about finding common ground? Like sometimes I'll give an example. There's a supermarket that I like to go to that has like, it's a hot food bar and I eat there a lot. And there's often interesting people around, sometimes attractive girls, sometimes just people that seem like they've got something cool to say. And without making an observation and putting the focus on them, you could comment about like, wow, there's a $20 bottle of water. Like, how absurd is that? You can kind of, is that useful at all to make a meaningful connection with somebody?
Yeah, it
That
can't be. What we're really hoping for from common ground, and tactical empathy is a replacement for common ground because what you want from common ground is
Hmm.
understanding, and that's really what we're looking for from common ground. If we have this, we share an understanding. If you like the same things that I like, or if you're from the same place I'm from, common ground I've seen has triggers to the strongest instantaneous connection for geographical common ground or ethnic common ground. But what are we looking for? We're really looking for the other side to understand where we're coming from. Now, in those moments that we get this geographic or ethnic common ground, like I grew up in Iowa. Somebody says, "Hey, man, yeah, I'm from Iowa. It's this wonderful blue collar accepting place." But if you're from Iowa, we're going to initially hit it off. But what happens if I don't have common ground? Do I want to not be able to establish a relationship with that person? No, I don't. I don't want to cut myself out of 90% of the world.
Hmm.
So if you realize that common ground is just a desire from the other side for you to know where they're coming from, Now you can up level that whole approach by just articulating. You could be, you could be from Mississippi. I'm from Iowa, or I spent a lot of time in New York City. As soon as I begin to understand where you're coming from, then common ground falls away because you want to be understood. And that's why, you know, raising a level of your game to empathy, which is just genuinely understanding where the other side's coming from. Common ground, you don't need it anymore because empathy is so much better.
Agree. Wow, mind blowing. You're obviously an incredibly well spoken person. Are there any tools that you're familiar with for your students that can help people get better to develop greater verbal fluency? I think this is a big aspect of this, but you're somebody, for example, who's like very verbally, like you just, you wield language like like a like a blade, like very very surgically. You're very good with your language. But I think there are some people out there that are concerned that maybe they don't, they're not as good at speaking.
I look at making mistakes verbally and in my articulation as learning accelerators, opportunities to get smarter. That's in language fluency, whether it's just trying to get, more articulate in your own language or even learn another language. What holds you back is the fear of mistakes, because then you keep your mouth shut. And you begin to see mistakes as learning accelerators in so many different instances. Like, I think her name is Sarah Blakely, the woman who invented Spanx, Jesse Itzler's wife.
Hmm.
Talk about a power couple. Two phenomenally people. And I think I remember hearing that around her dinner table growing up, and that her dad used to go like, "What mistakes did you make today?" They
Hmm.
would celebrate their mistakes and they would look at them as accelerators. And in point of fact, they are accelerators. The director of business development for the Black Swan Group's a young lady named Davy Johnson. She goes on a mission to Ecuador. She didn't speak Spanish, but she's this positive, upbeat person. And the person that where she was supposed to learn Spanish from said, "Yeah, well, you're going to learn it. It's an immersive environment. And reality is, it's going to take you 18 months to get to really good fluency. And the real reality is you're going to have to make 10,000 mistakes in the language to get to fluency." And David was like, "Oh, I'll make them sooner."
Hmm.
And she looked at every mistake as a learning opportunity. She obtained that fluency in 8 weeks, not 18 months. So, in any sort of verbal fluency or whatever you're in, you know, be willing to make mistakes. So the self-deprecating thing that you mentioned earlier. I'm from Iowa. I spent a lot of time in New York City. I got the most convoluted way of saying things of anybody you ever heard on the planet. But I get a kick out of butchering words or mispronouncing words, because then if I'm self-deprecating, it becomes something that we can laugh about together. So yeah, the verbal fluency is a lot of fun if you're willing to make fun of yourself.
Couldn't agree more. When I first launched this podcast, I would want to edit myself
Ah,
because, yeah, I mean, I was reluctant to even launch a podcast because I know that the world had, all the content that I had put out up until that point was an audiobook, which is a very polished presentation. It's a very,
right.
there are no ums and knows
Right.
and other pause words in an audiobook. And so I thought that coming out with a podcast and giving people the opportunity to listen to the real me would reduce my credibility somehow, compared to the audiobook. And so I would like edit myself at the very beginning of my podcast. But I've learned, over time, that that's not the way to do things. That you become a better speaker, and you become more verbally fluent, and also you endear yourself to the audience. The audience realize that there's a real person
Yeah.
across,
Yeah.
coming through their headphones. And
Yeah.
so I love that advice to be willing to make mistakes and to just keep them out and then to make a joke about them. Sometimes when I'm
Yeah.
doing like an ad for some of my sponsors, I'll stumble over the wording and I'll say, "Oh man, apparently I can't speak today."
Yeah.
And yeah, so this is all such good advice. Such good advice.
And it makes life that much more enjoyable too.
Mm-hmm.
Not only does it make you more successful, it does, but you have even more fun along the way, which is really what the whole point was. Why do you want to be successful? So you can be happy. Well, be happy and you're going to be more successful.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
So your skin and your brain and your spine evolved from the same freaking layer.